I'm John Kalodner. I formerly was a famous A&R executive in the record business, now unemployed. And we're doing this interview in Los Angeles, California in January 2006. I loved music and I always listened to music, and I noticed when I was 13 or 14 or 15 that I could always tell what song was going to be a hit from an album that I would buy or a song that they would play on the radio. I could tell whether it was going to be a big song or a failure. And I always had this talent for pop and rock music, not any other kind of music, but those two genres I always had the talent for. And in my career, it proved to be true because 90% of the time I would always be right. 10% of the time I would be totally wrong and totally off the mark, but that was probably a greater percentage than anyone who's ever been in A&R has had, and it was just innate, and I developed it over the years, learning from the mistakes I made and really paying attention to my mistakes and criticism that Ahmet Ertegun would give me, and David Geffen and all the greats of the music business, like Don Iyer and the people that I worked for. And also just knowing about myself, getting therapy to allow myself to know things that I would do that would be self-destructive because I would be so, twisted by the artist, which would happen quite often. So instead of taking drugs and drinking and acting out in other ways, I tried to figure out what my issue was in myself, and so I had a clearer head than anyone that ever did A&R because I didn't do those things. I got started in the business as a photographer and a newspaper critic in Philadelphia. I was taking pictures of bands and writing articles for newspapers, the Philadelphia Bulletin and Inquirer, doing articles for various publications. And then Atlantic Records decided to hire me because I could write, I could photograph, and I could eliminate a lot of costs that they had all in one person. So I went to work for Atlantic Records in early 1974. I went to Atlantic Records and they tried to work you as hard as you can to see if you would quit or break or fail, and I obviously passed the test, and I worked in publicity, which it was for 2 years or so, taking thousands of pictures of artists at press conferences, at parties. Record companies used to have parties every week for their artists. I took pictures of executives. I took pictures at executives' weddings, bar mitzvahs, other functions, and I wrote almost everything that came out of Atlantic Records until Arthur Levy and Bob Kaus came to work there. At the same time, I went home to Philadelphia on weekends, and I was still a reviewer for the newspaper on Saturdays and Sundays, and I reviewed everything except for Atlantic Records acts. And so I still was a newspaper writer until 1976, at which time I moved to California for various interesting circumstances. How I got into A&R was Jerry Greenberg, who was president of Atlantic at the time. He said, I need somebody to listen to tapes, go see bands. And I said, well, I'll do it. And the funny thing was, he said, well, as long as you bring in your own equipment and still do your job as the writer and photographer, you can do A&R. So in addition to writing the bios and the press releases and taking the pictures, I brought in my own TAC cassette deck and TAC reel-to-reel and started to listening to all the demos, and this is about, I guess, late 1975. Well, demos came in the 70s as up until recently, in all forms of, they came in all through all ways, through all sources, in the mail, through lawyers, through journalists, through radio stations, and they were always sent with a letter and a reel-to-reel in those days, or a cassette. This is before the advent of CDs, so it was either a reel-to-reel tape or a cassette tape, and there were literally hundreds of demos sent every week, which lasted up until probably when I left Columbia Records in 2003. I was still getting hundreds of demos a week from various sorts. The demos that I would pay attention to were the demos from the lawyers, music lawyers, and people in the music business, or people that had worked at radio stations or had something else to do with music, because it's not possible to listen to the volume of material that came in. A good lawyer is still going to get to an A&R person or a record executive today. It's still a good route to go, especially if you have a demo tape that has some merit in whatever field of music that you're pursuing. It's always been the most direct route, and I would assume that it still is. If Don Passman or Gary Gilbert or Peter Paterno called me, I would always listen to a tape, even right now when I'm really not employed, but it still might be something that I could help them with. So a lawyer is always really a good standard old-time route in order to have your talent material heard. A&R is a term that means artist and repertoire, which is coined from a probably 40s and 50s definition of a job of a person at a record company who signed the artists and then found the songs from outside writers, which was the repertoire, such as Johnny Mathis, Columbia Records, a great famous artist singer who was signed, and then they would find songs for him, as with many groups. Now, self-contained bands were around then, but were in the minority. So the A&R term, as the music business evolved in the 60s, remained the same. In the beginning, an A&R person is a talent scout who finds talent to sing, or as a band, play and sing their music, either that they've written or somebody else has written. A&R evolves into something else if you are a full service A&R person, that you then become the arbiter of the band's material and the editor of their material and the matchmaker for them working with a producer, other writers, art directors, video directors. You're sort of the director of the show or of the business of someone's recorded music. So somebody who is a producer usually makes the music in the studio, and the A&R person is actually the director of the whole operation, because you're the one who decides what producer is going to be used, what songs are picked. At least that's the definition of an A&R person up until fairly recently.
How has it changed recently?
Well, the decline of the record companies has, it's caused a great, I don't even know how to put this. It's the A&R person is not valued now, because record companies now want to sign bands for as little as possible. They want to spend as little as possible on making records because they are not able to sell that many, because most people who are younger and who like music will try to steal the music instead of buying it. So the income sources have dried up. Therefore, it's hard to pay A&R people to sign bands. It's hard to sign bands for a lot of money. It's hard to make studio recordings that are more than rudimentary, because experimentation costs money. And so the function of an A&R person has changed. I mean, a record company now, they shun me because I only cost them money, meaning a band that I would work with, I would want to get it right, so we would redo things. It would cost more money, and so that's not really the economics of the record business now, due to the stealing of the consumer and the blatant disregard of copyright laws by everyone. I love music. I love to help to create music because the musicians are the creators, and I'm not a musician, so it allows me to have some hand in creativity of an art that I otherwise wouldn't be a part of. On the other hand, most musicians I hate because they're thoughtless and self-centered and really fairly uncaring about anything except themselves. And so in working with them, especially as an A&R person, they also learn to hate you because you are the only person in their life that criticizes them. Nobody else criticizes them, not their manager, not their fans, not their girlfriends or boyfriends. It's just you. So they end up really, when they're successful, they hate you and they feel contempt for you. And that's really what has happened in my career with all the great records I've made, which anyone could see on my website. All the bands that I've worked with, you don't end up with any friends being an A&R person, because you're the person who criticizes them, and you're the person that tells them no, and you're the person that always is pushing them to do better and not, gratifying them or kissing their ass. The reasons to do it is that it probably was the best job ever in the world because, as I said, you work with music, you get to create something that you're not able to yourself, you get to work with creative people. Especially in the past, you got to work with not only creative artists, but great photographers, designers, video directors, all of which now have fallen pretty much by the wayside because no one can afford to pay them anymore. So it's probably the most gratifying job that you could have, except maybe being a doctor, healing somebody who was sick, or really helping somebody. The real people who have real jobs are, the people that are nurses or people that help handicapped people, and maybe researchers that, find cures. But as a gratifying job for your intellect, A&R is really the top of the line. There's things that you can articulate and learn about doing A&R, paying attention to what makes a song good or not good, trying to pay attention to other people who are great, who have done this, such as Clive Davis, where you can see he is focused on a formula about songs, and I tried to emulate what he would do in terms of, the formula of a hit chorus. And keys of a song not being in the minor, and various other tricks that I would notice that people who made hits would do. Many times I learned things from producers over the years who were great, and then as they became more famous, they forgot all the things that they learned or paid attention to. So I tried to learn from people who were far more talented than me, their mistakes. It's innate in an artist to write hits. They can hone their skill. They may be able to develop their skill and focus so that they can have a longer career than they would have without thinking about it. But a song, generally from an artist or a songwriter, is from their experience of their lifetime. And it's usually written early on in their career, and then the few people that are able to retain being able to write hits once they have success are people that are focused on remembering the principles of what they were thinking about, or dredging up ideas that came to them when they were in a period when they were either in psychic pain or starving or both. So it's a fairly innate talent for musicians to be great songwriters. Some musicians are just great musicians. Some musicians are just great songwriters. Some people are both. And those people are very lucky. Steven Tyler and John Bon Jovi, and there's just many people from over the years that have had huge careers, especially songwriters. And Diane Warren had one of the longest streaks of hits ever in history for a songwriter. And then eventually your time is over, just like my time as an A&R person was over. It just happens, and you have to plan for it. It's just one of those things. You have a time in the arts, and you can prolong it, but eventually it ends, and you have to, as hard as it is, you have to accept it. Good art always comes from psychic pain or hunger. People can be successful, but they still have the pain from the past, and a lot of times they can channel that into songs that are combined with good times that have happened to them, and then they even have a longer career. But most art comes from people that are tortured in themselves. And you're not going to see that as much now because the development of drugs such as the SSRIs, Paxil and Zoloft, and all of those drugs from the the medications that even out people, and the use of Ritalin and other drugs, Adderall and those drugs in younger children, evens them out and doesn't allow behavior that superstars exhibited in their growing up, such as probably Steven Tyler and Steve Perry and all the great frontmen. I'm sure all the great frontmen and even front women, I'm sure Ann Wilson and whatever, I'm sure that these people were, outcast to some extent, and definitely were not properly behaved in school because their brains don't function like anybody else's, and normalizing these kids now is one of the many reasons there's going to be a lot less music that's great. And everyone's afraid to say that, but it's totally true. I keep expecting every day for some huge announcement to say that Microsoft decided they're going to be in the music business, or, MySpace.com or somebody to say that, well, they're going to develop bands, and they're going to charge something for the music, and maybe that will resolve things. It's the record company's own stupidity first of all, that they allowed music to be put unprotected onto an MP3 file. Secondly, that they didn't lower the prices of CDs to $9.99 when they should have. So the record companies couldn't have made more mistakes if they tried. And the public really gave no thought to destroying an artistic business that they relied on. And then, of course, the advent of shit rap music really put the nail in the coffin, because that's disposable music that is not really, doesn't cost anything to make. And there are some artists in that area, but in general, that's not an artist-driven business like the rest of the music business was. That music is certainly one of the contributing factors to the lack of value of music. Well, to tell you the truth, more people buy that music than any other music. So it's something I don't understand, but that is in fact the case, that music, hip-hop, rap music, is now the most important segment of purchased music. The music that I got into doing was complicated pop and rock music that was very expensive, very difficult. It was all original. Hip-hop music is based on a beat or some section of music that was already been recorded. And so the art of that music is in the urban poetry, right, of the music. And so not the creation of the complex rhythmic and melodic patterns, mostly melody, which is extremely complicated to create. Original creation of that is very difficult. But the record companies, it's completely their fault. In sort of, that is where their support was in abandoning artists that needed their attention. But of course, you have to realize that the income was not coming in to artists that produced music that was artistic or sensitive or whatever, because that's not what the few things that people were buying, that's not what it was. Then, of course, there's always exceptions, which mostly have to do with celebrities, such as, I saw Jamie Foxx made a record, and he sold a lot of records, and I was impressed because I saw he went on the Today Show and he played a piano and he sang, and I was extremely impressed. But you don't see that much anymore, and it's a big problem. I mean, music today is really, the red-haired stepchild of real music, and in general, it's a pitiful second thought to the 40 or 50 great years of pop and rock music. You see once in a while things that are well done or great, Maroon 5 or Avril Lavigne, or even some Hillary Duff songs, or there's certain things that you see that are really well done, or Carrie Underwood or somebody from American Idol works out. But in general, the selection, the music that is produced is crap, and it's pretty embarrassing for somebody like me. I mean, I decided to go to the Grammys this year with some singer that really wanted to go, and when I voted, for the Grammys, which I have since 1975 or 76, there were not only was there barely anything to vote for, but most of the stuff that I voted for, because you had to make a selection, was just average at best. And that's a pretty terrible statement about the popular music business. I'd say the finest music that's produced now comes out of Nashville, because the song is still king, and they still are focused on stars that are great singers. So the combination of great songs and great singers still produces pretty good music, such as, Kenny Chesney or any of those, Keith Urban or any of those people that are now huge stars. But I don't see that happening in the pop music business in New York or Los Angeles. Do you? I mean, I would have to say that in observing from afar now that I'm a discarded, record executive, the only person that I see developing a career now seems to be Kelly Clarkson, which I'm very happy about, because she's a talented artist and she's finally hit a groove where she does songs of, the proper caliber. Funnily enough, the big song from her record is a song that Avril Lavigne wrote but didn't want to do, which is truly a classic story if you're an A&R person, because it happens to almost all artists that once they become famous, they don't want to do anything, that they deem commercial or they don't think is the right for themselves. But that's funny that Avril Lavigne wrote that song that Kelly Clarkson had the #1 record with. The business is so far from what I joined up to be in, and that's pretty sad. Although I have to say that I've had one of the the best lives ever of anyone could have, and I always think every day how great it was. But it's sad that I have to think how great it was. It'd be great if a new model was invented, or someone came up with some sort of a revised plan. I keep expecting Microsoft or Electronic Arts or Oracle or one of these guys to announce someday that they've decided and devised a system of delivery of music that's fair to people, both the public and the musicians. It's really interesting because Steve Jobs has made his whole life on being one of the smartest people ever in public relations and selling what he wants to sell. But in terms of the music business, he's Satan, because he doesn't give a crap about the music business. The only thing he cares about is selling iPods and hardware or whatever else he's going to invent, which he always seems to invent things that other people should have thought of, which makes him, a true American genius. But as somebody who the record business or the music business looks up to, that shows you the incredible stupidity of music executives and anyone in the music business who thinks that. The only interest that Steve Jobs and Apple has is themselves. They don't care about musicians or their music. It's shocking that people think that, or you see stories about the music business and you see Steve Jobs referenced. That's ridiculous. He was just smart enough to make a device that people wanted. I saw a 60 Minutes interview with Howard Stringer, and he was smart and enough and man enough to admit that Sony was busy, thinking about everything else while the iPod became the standard of, music delivery, and Sony was the greatest electronics company in the world, had failed not only to make a device that played music, but they failed to protect their billions of dollars of copyrights and archived material that is a lifetime of art. Not only them, but the idiots at Warner and Universal. It's shocking to me. It's like these people are entrusted with art that can never be replaced. And it's like they've allowed people to come in and just loot them. It's akin to like somebody coming in and stealing all the stuff at Target. That would never happen. And anyone that says that that's not the case is a liar, and also lies to themselves. Music, there's no way music can be for free. Maybe it shouldn't have been 1898 like the pigs at the record company said it for some reason. I have no idea why it's 1898, but why people decided it's for free is a joke. And it's really going to damage the culture of America for a while, at least. And hopefully, like I said, the new model, somebody like the guy at MySpace or someone will say enough already, and there'll be some kind of something will happen. I always think this will unfortunately never happen. If one day Bill Gates woke up and somebody, one of these guys would get to him and said, you're losing $2 billion a year by the stealing of music. And he says to one of the guys while he's, off in India with the wife giving out all that money, which is really a cool thing to do, spectacular use of your money, very admirable. He said to one of these guys, well, I think, when we rewrite the Windows program, we're gonna write the MP3 file out of it. That'd be the end of the problem. That'd be it. In 3 or 4 years, that would be the end of the story. And then there'd be some file that he decided or somebody decided, and they could be involved with the Copyright Office or anyone interested, and they could set a standard. Well, a song is going to cost 40 cents, and that would be it. But that's just too simple and too good to be true that was how the problem's going to be solved. But the problem would be solved like that instantly. It would take one line of code at Microsoft to eliminate the problem. Because the MP3 file is a bastard child of some assholes at a university who were just screwing around to write a file to deliver shitty music, because, as you may or may not know, MP3 eliminates frequencies in music so that the music can be put into a small file. They invented it they did it, I don't know why, it came about, but they weren't thinking about using it as a stealing mechanism for music, but that's what it became, and the record companies let it.